I never thought a trash can would become evidence in a federal lawsuit. But that's exactly what happened when Deborah Patterson decided to make my life her personal crusade. It started on a Tuesday morning in March 2024 when I found the first violation notice taped to my front door in Scottsdale, Arizona. I had just moved into the Pleasant Valley Estates community 3 months prior, excited about finally owning a home after years of saving. The house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch with desert landscaping, and I had been meticulous about keeping everything in order. My name is Oliver Kent, and I work as a software engineer for a tech startup downtown. I keep to myself, maintain my property, and generally try to live a peaceful life. The notice was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with the community logo and everything. It stated that my trash cans were visible from the street, violating Section 4.2 of the community guidelines. I read it 3 times, confused, because my trash cans were stored in my garage except on collection day, which was exactly what the rules required. I walked outside and checked. The cans were right where they should be, tucked away in the garage with the door closed. I called the HOA office that afternoon. A pleasant-sounding woman named Marie answered and transferred me to Deborah Patterson, the vice president of the HOA board. Deborah's voice came through the phone, sharp and authoritative. "This is Deborah Patterson speaking." "Hi, Miss Patterson, this is Oliver Kent from 4782 Desert Rose Drive. I received a violation notice this morning about trash cans, but I believe there's been a mistake. My cans are stored in the garage as required." There was a pause. "Mr. Kent, I personally drove by your property and documented the violation. The cans were clearly visible. When was this? Because I only take them out on Wednesday mornings for collection." "That's irrelevant. The violation occurred and it's been documented. You have 10 days to ensure compliance, or you'll face a fine." "But I am in compliance. Could you tell me specifically when you saw this?" "Mr. Kent, I don't have time to argue. The notice stands. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding the phone, bewildered. It seemed like an honest mistake, so I decided to let it go. I sent a written response to the HOA office explaining that my trash cans were properly stored and attached photos with timestamps showing them in the garage. 2 weeks later, another notice arrived. This time it claimed my lawn had unauthorized plant species that didn't match the approved desert landscaping list. I had hired a professional landscaping company specifically recommended by the community when I moved in. Every single plant had been selected from the approved list. I still had the invoice and the list they used. I drove to the HOA office in person. It was located in a small building near the community entrance, decorated with the same desert plants everyone in the neighborhood had. Marie greeted me warmly. "I need to speak with Deborah Patterson about these violation notices," I said, keeping my tone polite. Marie's expression shifted to something between sympathy and discomfort. "Let me see if she's available." Deborah emerged from a back office. She was exactly what I expected. A woman in her mid-50s with a severe bob haircut, wearing a blazer despite the Arizona heat, and carrying a tablet like it was a weapon. Her lips were pressed into a thin line as she looked me up and down. "Mr. Kent, what can I do for you?" "I'd like to discuss this latest violation notice. All my plants are from the approved list. I have documentation. I reviewed your landscaping personally. There are species that don't comply." "Which ones specifically?" She tapped on her tablet. "The agave near your front walkway is the wrong variety. It's blue agave, number 7 on the approved list. It appears to be a different variety to me. Would you like to see my invoice from Desert Dreams Landscaping? They're on the recommended vendor list." Deborah's jaw tightened. "Mr. Kent, I've been on this board for 8 years. I know what complies and what doesn't. You can dispute this at the next board meeting if you wish, but the violation stands." Over the next 3 months, the notices kept coming. My mailbox was allegedly the wrong shade of beige. My house numbers were supposedly too large, even though they were the exact size specified in the guidelines. My garage door was left open for too long, even on days when I was out of town, and it was definitely closed. Each notice was signed by Deborah Patterson, and each one was completely baseless. I started documenting everything. I bought a security camera system and installed cameras covering every angle of my property. I photographed my house daily. I kept every receipt, every invoice, every piece of correspondence. My dining room table became a command center covered in files and printouts. The fine started in June. $50 for the trash can violation I had disproven. $75 for the plants that were definitely approved. $100 for the mailbox that matched every other mailbox on the street. I refused to pay them and submitted detailed appeals with photographic evidence for each one. In July, I attended my first HOA board meeting. About 20 residents sat in a beige community room while the 5 board members sat at a folding table up front. Deborah sat in the center, flanked by the president, a retired dentist named Harold, the treasurer, a nervous accountant named Beth, and 2 other members who barely spoke. When the appeal portion of the meeting came, I stood up with my folder of evidence. I'm here to appeal multiple violation notices that I believe were issued in error. Deborah didn't even look at my documents. The board has reviewed your appeals and finds that all violations were valid. The fines will stand, and if they're not paid within 30 days, they'll increase by 50%. But you haven't looked at my evidence. I have photos, timestamps, receipts. Mr. Kent, we don't need to see photos. The violations were documented by a board member, and we trust our board members. Next item. I looked at Harold, the president. He avoided my eyes. Beth, the treasurer, was studying her papers intently. No one was going to help me. This isn't right, I said, my voice rising. You can't just issue false violations without reviewing evidence. Mr. Kent, if you continue to be disruptive, you'll be asked to leave, Deborah said coldly. I sat down, my face burning. Several other residents glanced at me with sympathy, but no one spoke up. After the meeting, an older man approached me in the parking lot. His name was Robert, and he lived 3 streets over. Don't feel bad, he said quietly. Deborah did the same thing to the Martinez family last year, drove them crazy with violations until they sold their house and moved. She doesn't like anyone she doesn't like, if you know what I mean. Why would she target me? I've never even spoken to her before that first notice. Robert shrugged. With Deborah, who knows? Maybe you parked in her favorite guest spot once. Maybe she doesn't like your car. Maybe you remind her of someone. She's gotten worse over the years. And Harold just lets her do whatever she wants because she does most of the actual work. Has anyone ever fought back? The Martinez family tried. They eventually gave up. Legal fees were too much. I drove home that night furious. The fines now totaled over $400 for violations I hadn't committed. But I'm stubborn, and I'm not someone who backs down from bullies. The notices continued through August and September. My front door was allegedly the wrong color, even though it was the same color as when I bought the house. My security cameras were supposedly not approved, even though there was no rule about security cameras. I received a violation for parking my car in my own driveway overnight, which was absolutely allowed. In October, things escalated. I received a notice stating that I had made unauthorized modifications to my home's exterior. The specific claim was that I had painted my trim without approval. I hadn't painted anything. I took detailed photos and compared them to the listing photos from when I bought the house. The trim was identical. I submitted another appeal with photo comparisons, paint chip analyses, and a statement from the previous owner confirming nothing had been painted. Deborah denied it within 24 hours. The fines were now over $1,200. More concerning, I received a letter stating that if the violations weren't corrected and fines paid by December 1st, the HOA would place a lien on my property. That's when I decided to fight back properly. I wasn't going to let Deborah Patterson take my home over her manufactured complaints. I spent 2 weeks researching attorneys. I needed someone who specialized in HOA disputes and wasn't afraid of a fight. I found a firm in Phoenix called Morrison & Associates. The lawyer I met with was a sharp woman in her 40s named Jennifer Morrison. I spread out my documentation across her conference table. Photos, timestamps, violation notices, appeal letters, and a detailed timeline I had created. Jennifer reviewed everything methodically, making notes. After 40 minutes, she looked up. Mr. Kent, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of HOA harassment I've seen. Every single one of these violations is either completely fabricated or based on a misrepresentation of the rules. Can we fight it? We can do better than fight it. We can sue for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. If we can prove this was targeted and malicious, which your documentation strongly suggests, we might also pursue abuse of authority. What will it cost? Jennifer leaned back. I'll be honest with you, this could get expensive. But I think we have a strong enough case that I'm willing to take it on contingency for the damages, plus you pay court costs. If we win, and I think we will, you'll recover your attorney fees from the HOA. Let's do it. We filed the lawsuit in November. The complaint detailed every false violation, included all my evidence, and requested damages for harassment, emotional distress, and attorney fees. We also filed an emergency motion to prevent the HOA from placing a lien on my property while the case was pending. The response was immediate and dramatic. 2 days after Deborah was served with the lawsuit, I received a notice that I was being fined for having my lawsuit documents visible through my front window. I'm not kidding. She claimed that having legal papers visible from the street was creating an eyesore and violated community standards. Jennifer actually laughed when I called her. She just handed us additional evidence. This is retaliatory and proves malicious intent. We amended the complaint to include the new violation. In December, I was contacted by 3 other residents who had also been targeted by Deborah. They had all received numerous false violations, paid thousands in fines, and felt helpless. One couple, the Johnsons, had actually sold their house just to escape the harassment. With their permission, Jennifer reached out to them as potential witnesses. The HOA's attorney tried to get the case dismissed, arguing that the board had discretion in enforcement matters. Judge Maria Rodriguez denied the motion, stating that discretion didn't include the right to fabricate violations. Discovery was enlightening. We subpoenaed all of Deborah's emails and records related to my property. What we found was damning. Deborah had sent multiple emails to other board members explicitly stating that she wanted to make things difficult for me. In one email to Harold, she wrote, "Kent thinks he can question my authority. I'll have him drowning in violations until he begs to leave." When I asked Jennifer why Deborah had targeted me in the first place, she found the answer buried in email records. The previous owner of my house had been Deborah's friend. When the owner decided to sell without telling Deborah first, Deborah felt betrayed. She had apparently wanted her nephew to buy the house. When I bought it instead, I became the target of her displaced anger. It was insane. My entire year of hell was because I unknowingly bought a house that someone else wanted. We also discovered that I wasn't the only victim. Deborah had targeted at least 7 other homeowners over the past 3 years. Most had paid the fines rather than fight. The Johnsons had lost over $5,000 before selling their home at a loss just to escape. In January 2025, the HOA made a settlement offer. They would dismiss all violations and fines against me if I dropped the lawsuit. No admission of wrongdoing, no damages. Absolutely not, I told Jennifer. This isn't just about me. She's been doing this to people for years. I was hoping you'd say that, Jennifer replied, because I think we should expand this into a class action on behalf of all the homeowners she's targeted. We did exactly that. The Johnsons joined as plaintiffs, along with 2 other families who had paid thousands in fraudulent fines. Our amended complaint requested not just damages but also an injunction removing Deborah from the board and implementing oversight procedures. The board meeting in February was packed. Word had spread about the lawsuit, and at least 50 residents showed up. Deborah looked shaken as she sat at the board table, her usual confidence cracked. During public comment, resident after resident stood up to share their own stories of harassment. A single mother described being fined for children's toys in her yard, even though they were in the approved play area. An elderly veteran talked about violations for his medical equipment being visible through a window. The stories went on for over an hour. Harold finally spoke, his voice tired. "The board takes these concerns seriously. We're conducting an internal review." "You've enabled this for years," someone shouted from the back. "You're just as responsible." The meeting dissolved into chaos. Deborah fled out a side door. In March, as we prepared for trial, the HOA's insurance company got involved. They hired an investigator who reviewed all of Deborah's violation records for the past 5 years. The report was devastating for the HOA. It found that Deborah had issued over 200 violations, and at least 60% of them were either completely false or exaggerated beyond reasonable interpretation of the rules. The insurance company pressured the HOA to settle. In April, we received a serious offer: full damages for all plaintiffs, including compensation for the Johnsons' home sale loss, all attorney fees, removal of Deborah from the board, and implementation of an independent review process for all future violations. Jennifer advised me it was a strong offer. We'd likely win at trial, but this gets you everything we wanted, plus guarantees real change. What about Deborah? Does she face any personal consequences? That's the tricky part. The HOA is offering to settle, but Deborah personally hasn't offered anything. We can continue the personal claims against her individually, then we continue. The HOA settled with us in May. Each plaintiff received compensation. I got back every penny I'd spent on the case plus damages for emotional distress, and Deborah was permanently removed from the board. A new oversight committee was established with real teeth to prevent future abuse. But we weren't done with Deborah personally. Our personal claims against her for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress continued. Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover her because her actions were deemed intentional rather than negligent. Deborah had to hire her own attorney, and discovery revealed her financial situation. She and her husband had significant debt. They had refinanced their house multiple times and had very little equity. The stress of the lawsuit had also caused problems in her marriage. In July, we went to trial on the personal claims. The trial lasted 3 days. Jennifer presented our evidence methodically: the timeline of false violations, the emails showing intent, testimony from multiple residents, and expert testimony about HOA standards and proper enforcement procedures. Deborah's attorney tried to argue that she genuinely believed the violations were real and was just being thorough in her duties. But the emails destroyed that defense. There was no way to explain away her statement about making my life difficult. I testified on the second day. Jennifer walked me through the entire ordeal, and I explained how the constant violations had affected me. I talked about the stress, the anxiety every time I came home wondering what new notice would be waiting, the way it had consumed my life for over a year. Did you ever consider just selling your home and leaving? Jennifer asked. Every single day, I answered honestly. But I worked too hard to buy that house. I saved for years, and I couldn't stomach the idea of letting a bully win. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. They found in our favor on all counts and awarded damages totaling $85,000. Between my claim and the other plaintiffs, Deborah owed over $150,000. She didn't have it. Her attorney filed an appeal, but it was denied. In September, Deborah and her husband were forced to sell their house to pay the judgment. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had driven multiple families from their homes lost her own home in the process. I watched from my front window as the moving truck pulled up to Deborah's house 3 streets over. Part of me felt bad. Losing your home is devastating, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But another part of me, the part that had spent a year being tormented for no reason, felt that justice had been served. The Pleasant Valley Estates community changed after that. The new board implemented strict oversight procedures. Every violation now required photographic evidence, and homeowners received a mandatory review period with the right to present counter-evidence before any fines were issued. An independent arbitrator was available for disputes. Robert, the neighbor who had warned me early on, stopped by one evening in October. "You did something the rest of us were too scared to do," he said. "The whole community is better for it. I just wanted to keep my house. You did more than that. You stopped a tyrant." Life slowly returned to normal. I focused on my work, enjoyed my home, and gradually the stress of the previous year faded. No more violation notices appeared on my door. No more certified letters arrived in the mail. I could take my trash cans out on Wednesday mornings without anxiety. In November, I attended an HOA meeting for the first time since the settlement. The atmosphere was completely different. Harold had stepped down as president, replaced by a younger resident named Marcus who actually seemed to care about the community rather than just maintaining control. The board listened to residents, discussed issues respectfully, and made decisions transparently. During the meeting, Marcus addressed what had happened. "I think we all learned a hard lesson about accountability," he said. "This board works for the community, not the other way around. We're here to maintain our neighborhood and help each other, not to be petty tyrants." Several people applauded. I noticed that the meeting room was more crowded than before. People were engaged again, no longer afraid to participate. In December, as the year anniversary of when I first filed the lawsuit approached, Jennifer called me. "I wanted to let you know that Deborah's appeal was officially denied. The case is completely closed. How's she doing?" Jennifer paused. "I probably shouldn't say, but I heard she and her husband moved to Tucson. Apparently they're renting an apartment. Her husband filed for divorce last month." I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Deborah had brought this on herself with her cruelty and abuse of power, but the destruction of her entire life seemed like a heavy price. "Do you regret pursuing it?" Jennifer asked, reading my silence. "No," I said after a moment. "She needed to be stopped. If we hadn't fought back, she'd still be there making people miserable. You did the right thing, Oliver, not just for yourself, but for everyone in that community." After we hung up, I went outside and looked at my house. It was fully decorated for Christmas, with lights along the roofline and a wreath on the door. Everything was within HOA guidelines, of course, but I wasn't worried about it. I had already received a compliment from Marcus about how festive the neighborhood looked. My phone rang. It was my sister Nicole calling from Seattle. "Hey, how's the HOA situation?" she asked. "Last time we talked, you were still dealing with legal stuff. It's finally over. Completely done. Thank God. You sounded so stressed every time we talked. I was worried about you." "I was stressed, but it worked out. Are you going to stay in the house?" "I would have sold it and moved after all that." I looked at my front door, at the house I had worked so hard to buy, at the neighborhood I had fought to make better. "Yeah, I'm staying. This is my home." The next year passed peacefully. I got a promotion at work. I dated someone for a few months, though it didn't work out. I made friends with several neighbors, including Robert and a young couple who moved in down the street. Life was just normal, which after everything that had happened, felt like a blessing. In March 2026, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Deborah. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a handwritten note on plain paper. "Mr. Kent, I know you have no reason to read this or care what I have to say. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm writing because my therapist suggested I take accountability for the harm I caused. You were right about everything. The violations were false. I targeted you and others because I felt powerless in other areas of my life and abused the only power I had. I destroyed my own life with my behavior, and I destroyed yours for over a year. I'm truly sorry. I hope you've found peace in your home. Deborah Patterson." I read it 3 times. It didn't change what had happened, but it was something. Acknowledgement, at least. I showed it to Robert the next day when he stopped by. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. "Nothing, but it's good to know she understands what she did." "Are you going to write back?" I thought about it. "No. Some things just need to end." Robert nodded. "You're probably right." In April, the community held its annual spring fair. It was the first one I had attended, and I was surprised by how much fun it was. There were food trucks, a live band, and various booths set up by residents. The new board had organized it, and the turnout was huge. I was manning a booth for the Community Garden Committee, something I had joined a few months earlier, when Marcus came over. "Oliver, I wanted to thank you again for what you did last year," he said. "I know it cost you a lot of time and stress, but you genuinely improved this place. I was just protecting my property. You were, but the ripple effects were bigger. We have actual accountability now. People aren't afraid to come to meetings. The board actually discusses things instead of just rubber stamping whatever one person wants." I helped him carry some supplies to another booth. As we walked through the fair, I realized he was right. The community felt different. People were smiling, chatting with neighbors, participating. It felt like an actual community rather than a dictatorship. That evening, as the fair wound down and I helped clean up, I reflected on everything that had happened. The year of false violations, the stress, the lawsuit, the trial, and finally the resolution. It had been one of the hardest periods of my life, but I had come through it stronger. I thought about Deborah's letter. Despite everything, I hoped she was getting help and finding a way forward. Destroying someone's life had never been my goal. I had just wanted to live in peace in my own home. As I locked up my house that night, I felt genuinely content. The nightmare was over. The community was better. My home was truly mine, without the constant threat of harassment hanging over me. I never responded to Deborah's letter. Some chapters close on their own without needing a formal ending. She had her consequences, I had my peace, and that was enough. The following months continued in the same pleasant routine. I worked, spent time with friends, enjoyed my home, and participated in community activities. The garden committee actually planted a new community garden space, and I found I enjoyed the physical work and the collaboration with neighbors. In June, the local newspaper ran a story about HOA reform efforts across Arizona, citing our community's changes as a model. Jennifer called to tell me about it. "You started something bigger than you realized," she said. "I've had 3 calls this month from other HOA victims asking for representation. People are starting to understand they don't have to just accept abuse. It's good. No one should have to go through what we did. For what it's worth, Oliver, you were the perfect client. You documented everything, stayed rational even when things got crazy, and you had the courage to see it through. A lot of people would have given up." After we hung up, I pulled out the folder I still kept with all the documentation from the case. Looking through it now, months later, it seemed almost surreal. The absurd violations, the mounting fines, the threatening letters. It had all been so consuming at the time, but now it felt like something that had happened to someone else. I put the folder away in a box in my garage. I didn't need it anymore, but I kept it as a reminder. Documentation matters, standing up for yourself matters, and bullies only win if you let them. The summer passed with the brutal heat that Arizona is known for. I spent most of it inside my air-conditioned house, working remotely and occasionally venturing out in the evenings when temperatures dropped. The neighborhood pool was always busy, and I started going regularly, getting to know more neighbors. One evening in July, I was swimming laps when a woman about my age swam over during a break. "You're Oliver, right? The guy who sued the HOA?" I wasn't sure how to respond. It wasn't exactly my favorite identifier. She must have seen my expression because she laughed. "Sorry, that came out wrong. I'm Amanda. I moved here in January after everything was resolved. I just wanted to say thank you. I specifically chose this community because of the reforms that were put in place. It made me feel safe buying here. I'm glad something good came from it." "Are you kidding? The oversight procedures here are better than any HOA I looked at. You made a real difference." We ended up talking for a while. She was a teacher at a local elementary school and had bought a house 2 streets over. It was nice to hear that the changes were actually attracting people to the community rather than being just empty policy. In August, I received notice that I had been nominated for the HOA board. I immediately declined. I had zero interest in being on the board after everything I had been through. But several neighbors tried to convince me. "You'd keep things honest," Robert argued. "You know what abuse looks like. That's exactly why I don't want to be on the board. I've had enough HOA drama for a lifetime. Just think about it." I did think about it, and the answer remained no. I was happy to participate in committees and community events, but I wasn't going to put myself in a position of authority over my neighbors. I had seen how easily that power could corrupt. September brought relief from the summer heat and the start of a new routine. Work picked up with a major project launch, and I found myself busier than I had been in months. It was a good kind of busy though, the kind that comes from engaging work rather than constant stress. In October, I was invited to speak at a community meeting in a neighboring HOA that was dealing with their own abuse issues. Jennifer had connected them with me, thinking my story might help. I was nervous as I stood in front of about 30 residents in a similar beige community room to the one where I had spent so many frustrating evenings. I'm not a lawyer or an expert, I started. I'm just someone who got tired of being pushed around. The most important thing I can tell you is to document everything. Every violation, every conversation, every piece of evidence that contradicts what you're being told. Without my documentation, I would have had no case. I walked them through my experience, the lawsuit, and the outcome. During the question period, a young woman raised her hand. Did you ever feel like giving up? Every day, I answered honestly. Fighting back is exhausting and expensive and stressful. There were times I wished I had just paid the fines and moved on. But then I would think about what that meant, letting someone drive me out of my home because they felt like it. And I couldn't accept that. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me and share their own stories. It was both validating and depressing to hear how common HOA abuse was. But it also reinforced that fighting back had been the right choice. November marked 2 years since I had filed the original lawsuit. The anniversary passed without fanfare, just another day in my now peaceful life. I spent Thanksgiving with my sister Nicole, who flew in from Seattle. You seem happy, she observed over dinner. Really happy, not just pretending everything's fine. I am happy. It took a while to get here, but I am. Are you glad you stayed in the house? Yeah, if I had left, Deborah would have won in a way. Not legally, but personally, she would have driven me out, which was her goal. Staying and building a life here feels like the real victory. December brought the holidays and a neighborhood that went all out with decorations. My lights were modest compared to some houses, but I enjoyed the festive atmosphere. The community organized a holiday party, and it was packed with families and neighbors celebrating together. As I stood in the community room, watching kids run around while adults chatted and laughed, I thought about how different this scene was from the tense, hostile board meetings of 2 years ago. This was what a community was supposed to be. Marcus came over with 2 cups of punch. Thought you might need a refill. Thanks. This is a great turnout. It's been a great year for the community. I know we went through hell to get here, but I think we're stronger for it. The community definitely is. I'm not sure I am. I said it jokingly, but there was truth in it. You are, though. You took on something scary and won. That changes a person. He was right. The experience had changed me. I was more confident, more willing to stand up for myself, more aware of the importance of documentation and evidence. But I had also learned about the cost of fighting back the stress, the time, the emotional toll. As 2026 drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the entire journey. It had started with a simple trash can violation and spiraled into a year-long nightmare of harassment, followed by a lengthy legal battle, followed finally by peace and reform. Would I do it again, knowing everything I know now? Honestly, I wasn't sure. But I also knew that if I hadn't fought back, I would have regretted it for the rest of my life. In January 2027, I decided to finally finish the last project on my house that I had been putting off, renovating the backyard. I had plans for a small patio and an upgraded irrigation system for better desert landscaping. Of course, this required HOA approval. I submitted my application with detailed plans, photos, and specifications. Under the old board, this would have been a nightmare. Under the new system, it was reviewed by committee. I received feedback within a week, made 2 minor adjustments, and got approval. The whole process took 3 weeks and was completely professional. As the contractors started work on the backyard, I realized this was the first major project on my house that wouldn't be overshadowed by HOA drama. I could just focus on making my home better without fear of retribution or false violations. The renovation took 6 weeks. When it was finished, I had a beautiful patio with a pergola, updated landscaping, and a space I could actually enjoy. I invited Robert and some other neighbors over for a small gathering to show it off. This looks fantastic, Robert said, examining the stonework. You going to get a violation for it, he grinned. Don't even joke about that. Too soon? Always too soon. But he was right that it was funny now, in a dark humor sort of way. The fear had faded enough that we could joke about it. In February, I ran into Marcus at the grocery store. He mentioned that the HOA had won an award from the State Homeowners Association for Best Community Governance Improvements. They want someone from the community to accept the award at their conference in Phoenix. I was hoping you'd do it. Me? I'm not even on the board. No, but you're the reason for the improvements. It would mean a lot. I reluctantly agreed. The conference was in March, and I found myself on a stage in front of several hundred HOA board members and community managers, accepting an award for reforms that had come from my lawsuit. I never wanted to be involved in HOA governance, I said into the microphone, trying not to sound too nervous. I just wanted to live in my house in peace. But when that peace was taken from me by abuse of power, I had to fight back. The reforms in Pleasant Valley Estates weren't my idea, they were the community's response to recognizing that we had failed in our oversight. I hope other communities can learn from what happened to us and implement protections before abuse occurs, not after. The speech was short, but afterward several people came up to talk to me. Board members from other communities wanted to know more about our oversight procedures. Homeowners shared their own horror stories. Community managers asked about implementing similar reforms. It reinforced something I had been slowly realizing: what had happened to me wasn't unique. HOA abuse was a widespread problem, and most victims never fought back because the cost seemed too high. April brought an unexpected development. A production company reached out through Jennifer asking if they could feature my story in a documentary about HOA disputes. I declined. I had no interest in becoming the face of HOA reform or rehashing everything on camera. I kind of figured you'd say no, Jennifer said when I called to tell her. But I wanted to pass it along just in case. Has Deborah been contacted? I don't know. Would it bother you if she did it? I guess not. It's her story too, in a way. I never found out if Deborah participated in the documentary or if it was even made. I had moved on and I wanted to keep it that way. The spring and summer of 2027 passed quietly. I focused on work where I had been promoted to senior engineer. I dated someone for a few months before we mutually decided we weren't compatible. I traveled to Seattle to visit Nicole and met her new boyfriend. Life was just normal, gloriously normal, with no drama or legal battles or harassment. In September, nearly 3 years after the initial violation notice, I was working in my backyard when I noticed a for sale sign go up at Deborah's old house. New owners had bought it after Deborah was forced to sell, but apparently they were moving on. I wondered briefly what Deborah's life was like now. Was she still in Tucson? Had she gotten help for whatever had driven her to abuse her HOA authority? Had she found peace, or was she bitter about losing everything? I realized I would probably never know, and that was okay. Our lives had intersected during one terrible year, but we were on different paths now. Her consequences were hers to bear, and my peace was mine to enjoy. In October, I was elected to the Community Garden Committee as chair. It was a small role, completely voluntary, with no actual authority. But it felt good to contribute positively to the community in a way that was about building something rather than tearing down abuse. We organized a fall planting day, and over 30 residents showed up to help. As I watched neighbors working together, laughing and chatting while planting vegetables and flowers, I felt genuinely grateful for how things had turned out. Sure, it had cost me a year of stress and thousands of dollars in legal fees that were never quite fully recovered despite winning. But I had my home, my peace, and a community that actually functioned like a community. That was worth something. As 2027 ended and 2028 began, I finally felt like the chapter was truly closed. The lawsuit was long over, Deborah was gone, the community had reformed, and I was just another resident living my life. In February 2028, I attended an HOA meeting, something I did occasionally now without any anxiety. During the meeting, a new resident stood up during public comment. "I just moved here from Pleasant Valley Estates South," she said, "and I wanted to say that this community's reputation for fair governance is why I chose to buy here. Thank you for maintaining these standards." After the meeting, I introduced myself to her. Her name was Lisa, and she mentioned that she had actually researched Pleasant Valley Estates specifically because of the reforms. "It's hard to find an HOA that actually has oversight and accountability," she said. "Most of them are just waiting to become the next horror story." "Well, we were the horror story first," I said. "That's why we have the oversight now." "I know, I read about the lawsuit. Must have been awful." "It was. But it's over now." Walking home that night, I realized that my story had become part of the community's identity. We were the neighborhood that had faced abuse, fought back, and reformed. Future residents were choosing us because we had learned from our mistakes. There was something satisfying about that legacy, even if I had never intended to create one. In March, Robert stopped by with news. He had been elected to the HOA board. "Figured it was time someone who remembers the bad old days had a voice," he explained. "Keep everyone honest." "That's great. You'll do a good job. Want to join? There's still an open seat." "Still no, but I'm glad you're doing it." The truth was, I had found my role in the community, and it wasn't on the board. I was active in committees, showed up to meetings, and stayed informed. But I didn't need or want formal authority. I had learned that the best way to prevent abuse of power was to have people willing to speak up and hold leaders accountable. And that didn't require being a leader myself. Spring brought more changes. Amanda, the woman I had met at the pool 2 years earlier, and I started dating. It was casual at first, but by summer we were serious. She understood the HOA history without making it define me, which was refreshing. "Do you ever regret buying this house?" she asked one evening as we sat on my patio. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had bought somewhere else. But then I wouldn't have met you, or Robert, or been part of this community's transformation. So no, I don't regret it, even with everything you went through? Even with that, it made me stronger. In July, Jennifer called with unexpected news. The documentary I had turned down had been completed and was being featured at a film festival in Denver. It included interviews with other HOA abuse victims and had sparked discussions about state-level HOA reform legislation. You started a movement, Jennifer said. Whether you wanted to or not, I just wanted to keep my house. I know, but sometimes the personal battles we fight have broader implications. You should be proud. I was proud in a complicated sort of way. I had never set out to be an activist or reformer. I had just been a homeowner pushed too far who decided to fight back. But if my fight helped others, that meant something. In September 2028, nearly 4 years after that first false violation notice, I proposed to Amanda. She said yes. We decided to stay in my house, our house now, and build our life together in Pleasant Valley Estates. Planning the wedding, I realized how far I had come. The house that had once been a source of constant stress was now the foundation for my future. The community that had been torn apart by abuse was now thriving and welcoming. And I had transformed from a target of harassment into someone who had fought back and won. The wedding was in November, held in the community center's garden area. Robert officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the ceremony. Marcus and half the board attended. Jennifer came and brought her family. The community I had fought to fix was now celebrating my happiness. During the reception, Robert gave a toast. 4 years ago, Oliver moved into our community and immediately became the target of abuse. He could have left. He could have accepted it. Instead, he fought back and changed everything. This community is better because he refused to be a victim. And now we get to celebrate as he starts a new chapter. To Oliver and Amanda. Everyone raised their glasses. Amanda squeezed my hand. Later, as we danced, she asked, "Any regrets?" I looked around at the celebration, at the community that had come together, at the friends I had made, at the home we would share. Not a single one. As 2028 ended, I could finally say that the nightmare of the false violations was truly behind me. Deborah Patterson had tried to drive me from my home, and instead she had lost hers. The HOA board that had enabled her was replaced with accountable leadership. The community that had suffered under her reign of petty tyranny was now thriving. I had paid a price for my victory: a year of stress, thousands of dollars, and countless hours of documentation and legal proceedings. But I had also gained something invaluable: the knowledge that I could stand up for myself, that fighting back against injustice was possible, and that one person refusing to be a victim could spark real change. My house on Desert Rose Drive was more than just a property now. It was the place where I had drawn a line and said no more. It was where I had documented every false claim, gathered every piece of evidence, and built an unshakable case. It was where I had learned that bullies only win if you let them, and that sometimes the hardest fight is also the most important one. Deborah Patterson had filed false code violations against me for a year, trying to make my life so miserable that I would leave. My countersuit had cost her everything: her position, her reputation, and ultimately her house. It wasn't the outcome I had wanted when I first hired Jennifer. I had just wanted the harassment to stop. But sometimes justice demands a higher price from those who abuse their power. As I stood on my patio on New Year's Eve watching fireworks in the distance, Amanda beside me and our future ahead of us, I felt genuinely at peace. The battle was over, the reforms were in place, the community was healed, and I was home, truly home, in a way that had nothing to do with property ownership and everything to do with belonging. The trash can that had started everything sat in my garage, just another ordinary object in an ordinary house. But I would never forget that it had once been evidence in a lawsuit that changed everything. Sometimes the smallest acts of petty tyranny can spark the biggest changes. If someone has the courage to fight back, that someone had been me, and I would never regret it.